And I was really excited after I met Taylor and Emma and Phil. And prior to that, I was extremely nervous because I am not really into acting or anything like that anymore. I don't do recording, none of that. So I just didn't know how I would handle that and thought it would be extremely awkward. But I was excited to share our stories because I think it helps people realize they're not alone in trying to transition back into life after the military.
Yeah, the sort of origins of making this film started with my two co-directors, Emma LeBlanc and Phil Sands. They were both journalists and they were embedded with the 101st in, I think it was 2000, was it 6 or 7, Kristina? And they had a series of portraits that they had taken of a platoon, and they were going through them and sort of talking to Colonel Lemp, who Kristina just referenced, and talking about the nature of homecoming and sort of what does that mean in a long-term way. And so they were the ones that brought this idea to like kind of go back to this group of people that they met when they were all younger. It's, what does that transition look like now? So I think Kristina had met Phil and Emma many, many years ago. So we kind of reintroduced them into their lives, which is great. Yeah, that's us.
Really cool.
Go ahead, Robert and Daniel.
Yeah, I am one of the producers of Bring Them Home. And I'm also in the documentary. The documentary is about the struggle and plights of deported veterans, and really how those two words came to be, because it's a head scratcher. When I first heard about even the idea or the concept that a military veteran can be deported after fighting for our freedom, I just needed to learn more about it. The origin story is kind of interesting because I come from a music background. And so we created a song called Excuse My Accent that was really the core of it was talking about the struggle of immigrants and diversity and xenophobia in America and beyond. And when we were writing the song and creating the song, I ran across this story of Hector Barajas, who is the president of the Deported Veteran Support House. I really heard about, read up on his story, and it just wanted to include him in the music video as a representation of the song itself. And from there, getting to know his story, we just said we want to capture it and really get to the bottom of it and see how we could be, as artists and musicians and creatives, how we can contribute to some type of awareness or change. And Daniel Torres, actually, who's here on my left, is a deported veteran himself, and one of the first deported veterans to regain his citizenship since this is such a new issue. So I'll let Daniel go ahead and tell his story.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel. I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was stationed in Twin Palms, California, and I'm an Iraq vet. I was deployed to Iraq in 2009 in the Al-Anbar province. So when I came to the United States when I was a little kid, right? And my family brought me to the country. And then when I turned 18, my visa as a minor was no longer valid. So for intents and purposes to immigration, I was illegal, but my entire family was here. So I joined the Marine Corps. I lied when I joined. I told them I was a citizen and I wasn't. And then about 3.5 years later, after coming back from Iraq, I was offered a position in intelligence, and I was going to get a corporal. They ran my top secret clearance, and that's when they found out that I was legal and I had lied. So I was discharged, and I was back as a civilian, but I was still illegal. So I couldn't really do anything. And at the time, immigration law really didn't provide a pathway for me to become a citizen or even a resident. So I decided to leave the United States. I went to France first. I tried to join the French Foreign Legion. However, I sustained a hearing loss while my service in the military. So I was a night entry into the Legion, and I ended up back in Tijuana, my hometown, where I met Hector Barajas and I met the other members of the Port Veteran Support House. And I realized that I wasn't the only veteran who couldn't go back to the United States. I thought I was the only one. I thought this was, just a me problem. But it turns out that it was a problem of an unknown number of veterans out there. Thanks to Hector Barajas and the work from the ACLU of Southern California, I got my citizenship in 2016. And since 2016, I've worked, I've done a lot of jobs, but mainly I've done research and advisor positions, and also cameos for documentaries, movies, and just advocacy for the deportation of veterans, and in order to try to end the deportation of veterans.
Thanks for sharing. We can do this conversation however we want, but maybe we want to kind of take a few minutes and just ask one project, all the questions that I'm sure we all have for each other, and just kind of move that way. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to, I know that we jumped on and started recording a little bit late. And so I do want to make sure that in the recording aspect of it, that you guys announce your film and we can kind of edit this part out.
We can always do that later. Diane, did we lose the beginning of the recording or something?
Yeah, I didn't realize that when I popped out of the room, the recording would follow me. So we've got a nice recording of our lobby, but we missed, Talia, we missed your introduction. I think we caught Kristina, but we missed yours, Taylor. So if we could, if you don't mind repeating those, that would be great.
Yeah, Talia, do you guys want to go ahead and then we can ask the questions and I'll do mine after?
Sure. So yeah, our film is called This Is Not a War Story, and it's a hybrid narrative that was produced over a period of about 5 years as a collaboration between myself as a civilian and the veteran community, where I met Eli, a community of paper makers who make paper out of military uniforms, and I was writing a film about trauma and suicidal ideation, and discovered a lot of the overlap. And I can elaborate more on the story if we want to get into the details of it, but it's basically a hybrid in the sense that it's a fictional narrative construct, and it has built-in sequences of improvisation within that, where veterans portray themselves in their own work and their own poetry, artwork, and music as well in the film.
I'm so curious how you came up with that character. I'm sure it was a collaborative process, and sort of the character that you play, sort of what the origin of that was, and what was it like writing this, especially with the input maybe of the veterans you're working with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the character that I play was, and the character that Sam Adegoke plays, the character of Will, these were the two sort of originating elements of the script. And it was originally going to be just a fictional story. And the way that I write is that I listen for, the characters, and I sort of explore who they are. I don't sort of predetermine it. And I made a discovery as I was writing that they both had common experiences through their trauma in the effect of having both been in a war. And I knew that I didn't know anything about that. So at that point, I took a step back from writing it. And I thought, well, if I'm serious about this, then I really have to just stop writing for a while and immerse myself. And I read everything I could read. And I finally got up the courage to sort of talk to veterans about their experiences. And I realized very quickly that through a series of just, affirmations coming back at me, that I was on the right track, in the sense that I'm telling a story that, is, my experience seemed to have a lot of overlap with theirs, and this became the building blocks of the bridge that we were creating with the film. And this idea that we wanted to, incorporate authentic voices into a narrative construct. It was very much part of the conception of the film from the beginning, that it was not a documentary, it was a story. intentionally told to sort of hold, the scope of a story would hold all of these different experiences and invite them in, and we'd find a way to integrate it. So it took a long time to build, but in my mind, it sort of had to be done this way. I wouldn't have done it otherwise.
No, it felt so natural, especially in the scenes in your workshop, Eli. Like, really felt like almost as if you were leading us into a space and letting us be immersed in it, which was really cool. I'm wondering what that was like for you, Eli, and your partners.
It was a little strange because there was a familiarity and a comfort in bringing people in and introducing, portraying the work that we do, because we have been doing it for many years. But then there was a little bit of a spin on it that, like, okay, there's some fictional element to this. There's a camera, there's some lighting that we don't normally have in our space. And so there was some of that where it felt like, okay, we're acting through this thing that we naturally do and we're familiar with. And so it was a little bit surreal trying to understand how this sort of hybrid thing works, because myself and a number of other folks had worked in doing some documentary stuff before, and having news interviews in our space and things like that. So it was familiar, but it was also this bold new step into a whole new direction, and collaborating into an artistic medium that we hadn't worked before much, which was film, fictional film. So it was exciting, and it felt really good to be able to have this opportunity to portray the work that we do on a more public stage, I guess, because so often the work that we do in our studio space is very private, and sort of, it's almost this sanctuary space. So it was really good to be able to break through some of those kind of boundaries that we'd been working in.
You mind if I ask a question real quick? Obviously, art is the centerpiece of healing in this movie. How did that relationship come about for you to be able to tell the story through that lens? Like actually utilizing the mill while you were developing the narrative, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, I see. I had a script finished that was basically a peer-to-peer dynamic. It was a Vietnam veteran advising an Iraq veteran. That was the construct, and I knew something was missing, and this was not quite the story yet. And I didn't know what it was, but then I came across Eli's artwork accidentally, and I was immediately struck by it. And then when I saw the actual process, I thought it was enormously compelling and tactile and meditative and photogenic and all of these amazing things. And it had the primary function of being a community. And this is what the film to me was missing. So when I saw that, I thought, okay, well, that's clearly got to be built in to the entirety of the film. And the question was how, and it took some evolving of the idea before it became clear that it had to be done in the way that it was. It's hard to encapsulate, speaking backwards about it essentially, but like it was every step of the way was a building of trust and of mutual interest in these processes that are artistic and they're also so physical. And so, so much about swapping of stories and things of that sort that I thought were very compelling on film.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seemed very organic, which is obvious, what you wanted to do. So to have that be the cornerstone, it's like that building, that room in itself told its own story that was complementary to all the stories being told. And yeah, so I loved it. That was a compliment, not a question.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. Thank you.
This is obviously not engaging with the content really, but I really loved the line in your film, or a couple of lines about was it like Fuck Zero Dark 30 and all the other war movies. And I feel like Kristina and Robert and Phil Belmont and I've had conversations about the nature of veterans films, war movies, what does that look like? And as we were making ours, trying to be thoughtful about that. And I really appreciated that. And I'm sure Kristina and Daniel maybe have thoughts about that too, but it was a line that stuck with me.
Absolutely.
What's next for you guys now?
Well, I do have another film that I'm wrestling with. Although I'm still working on getting this one out. It's gonna premiere on HBO November 4th. And believe it or not, there are still delivery things to be done. So, but it'll be available then, which I'm very excited about. And then after that point, I'll be able to get back in the saddle with the next film. But I do have it in the works. It's a much more contained film. It's not as much of a sprawl, and there's only 4 characters, but similar dark sort of themes, wrestling with life and death and whatnot. I mean,
I think
And we're
all-
also getting our
Yeah.
art studio back up and running. It's mostly been closed down since the pandemic started, and so shortly after filming, we have not really been able to hold workshops or access our studio space very well. So, you know, so our organization, Frontline Paper, is also just kind of getting back up and getting some momentum going as well, and getting back out into the community and getting veterans involved in our workshops and making more art. So we're trying to get our progress going again as well, since things have been on hiatus for a while.
Talia, do you want to tell us how we can find, just for the recording, if we can find more news about your workshop?
Yeah, so we our one of our main studios is in New Jersey. That's Frontline Paper and Frontline Arts. And then the studio that you actually see in the film is up near Ithaca, New York, and that's called Out of Step Press. So you can just Google either of those and find us and contact us through those channels.
Do you frequent art shows? Do you guys frequently do art shows, or was that, because I mean it's such an intimate process, and it was really shown how even showing the art, there was still a disconnect from the viewer looking at the art and the pain that was in the art itself. And I'm just wondering, is that just seems so real, you know? And I wonder, do you guys do art shows? Like, are you selling the art, or what are you guys doing with the art in the workshop, et cetera? And then actually, I would love to hear you talk about that, kind of that relationship.
So yeah, we do exhibit work in galleries all over the place. Again, that's also been pretty slow for the last year or two. Hoping to get that going again, but yeah. So you see the very intimate sort of closed setting of the workshop space in the film, and then you see the public setting of the gallery space, and so that's always been a crucial kind of dual components of what we do is you know, providing a safe space where veterans can work in, you know, in our own company with each other to create the work, and then the gallery serves as this sort of public commons where we can show our work, tell our stories, invite the public into this world, and you know, try to sort of build these bridges between veterans and civilians, and kind of engage in, you know, in that difficult dialogue that needs to happen. So we have been exhibiting our work in various gallery settings. We exhibit our work at universities, various libraries and academic institutions. So it's always been kind of a crucial component of what we do, and allowing veterans to have a platform to tell their stories that is, you know, outside of that mainstream lens of Hollywood film, right? As we critique in our film. And so, yeah, that is, it's an ongoing and very important component of the work that we do.
How difficult was it for you to open up about your experiences in front of a camera, and how were you able to overcome that?
The first few years that after I got home from Iraq, like many other vets, I didn't really have, I didn't have the language to tell that story. And I initially got involved in kind of speaking out and telling those stories through anti-war activism. And then through that, I sort of evolved into, found my place in the creative arts and creative writing. So I'd been doing it for a number of years prior to this film. We all come into this with our own, various barriers and restraints. And so some veterans really struggle with finding, the language to tell those stories. And that's part of why we offer this toolbox of being able to tell those stories through images and through visual arts. Others do it through creative writing and poetry. And so I didn't personally struggle with it a lot. By the time that we had started filming, I had been telling this story and engaging in these workshops and working with other veterans, sharing these experiences for many years. But, and then there's other people in the film. There's a Vietnam veteran in the film. And when just a few years prior to this film, he had connected to our organization. And for 30 something years, he never told any stories, and he didn't identify as a veteran. He never disclosed to anyone that he was a veteran. So, we all have our various paths that we go down to kind of find our voice and talk about those experiences. So I think that's, for me, what has always been the most important thing about experiencing or expressing the military experience through art, is that it gives us a language to do that we may not have ourselves just by trying to tell our stories.
A question. Hi Talia, it's Jen. We spoke on the phone with the festival. I had a question. Maybe I got in a little late, so sorry if it was already covered, but I was curious how you two connected and how this story kind of how this connected and how it kind of became a film. And then also a question of, for veterans, coming from a civilian standpoint, what is, I know that you're addressing the disconnect and kind of the reality of what it means to be a veteran. And what would you say is the most respectful way somebody can say, thank you for your service? Because I know that's kind of the jargon, right? And it can come from the heart, but it might not be felt that way from a veteran's perspective. So what is it been for you to have people say that, or what would you prefer people say? Kind of, that's my question.
I reckon we should jump on the second half of that question. I did cover the whole, I've blathered on about the origins of the story, which I'm happy to do again, but I would love to hear, us talk about hear from, certainly from Kristina and Daniel and Eli.
I think Talia's film, the character Will in the film has a whole monologue about the thank you for your service question. So I feel like the answer is there, and I don't really want to, take valuable time to give my piece of that. I think allowing these other veterans to express their opinions on the question would be great.
Kristina, what are your thoughts?
I appreciate it when people say thank you for your service, and I feel that's sufficient. I don't feel like I feel like people should feel obligated to like bend over backwards. It's just nice knowing you're appreciated, even if the conflicts are controversial or something that people don't agree with, because some of us may not have agreed with it either. We just signed up to do it. So just knowing that the civilians appreciate, sacrifice is pretty amazing. Like, it's really cool. But again, I've also seen the other side of that where, veterans are being attacked because of a conflict that we didn't decide to make. We just got stuck in it. So thank you for your service to me is always nice. I actually just never know how to respond to that. I usually just say thank you and go on about my day. So, but it is always appreciated.
Whenever someone says thank you for your service, I just say thank you because it's the polite thing to do. If I'm being honest, I don't like thank you for your service, me personally. The reason why I don't like it is because it kind of, what I feel about thank you for your service, it has this underlying that veterans are different, right? And our experiences are different, but we're still people. We're still just a regular person that's walking down the street. And thank you for your service. It just kind of, to me, it feels kind of like a cop out, like, oh yeah, I thank you for your service, I'm good. Like, I don't have to care about anything else anymore. And it's like, no, like, we're still neighbors, we're still people, we're still friends, we're still sons and fathers and daughters and all of these other things. If you really do care about the veteran community, get to know them, help out as much as you can, and really get involved. Don't just do thank you for yourself as check mark, moving on.
Yeah, that's deep.
Do you want to shift gears and talk about another film?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I would love to know from both of your films what, since we've been talking about the experience of sharing stories on camera, I'm interested to know, because we have such different disciplines. Like, we did it in a sort of construct of, semi-fictional construct, and then in both of your films, it's more of an interview based and a one-on-one kind of a construct. I would love to just know more about the experiences of that.
Yeah. I mean, so for us, we filmed over the course of a couple of years, and kind of going back and forth, crouching in Kristina's living room for hours on end until she forgot we were there, and sort of trying to build that story and sort of open up. And I think it was important to us. I think there's so many great films with experts and sort of offering that kind of top line vision, but we wanted to make a film where the veterans were telling their story, and it was in their words, and it was intimate, nuanced, and sort of lived in their world. And we wanted to show kind of the full spectrum of their lives. And so, I mean, Kristina can talk about what that felt like. But yeah, it was a long time, and we're really grateful that, she and Robert and Phil were so open and willing to let us in their space, because that's the biggest part of it for us. Kristina, you can talk about that.
Initially, I absolutely hated the idea, because I actually was still in the process of learning how to talk about it. I had denied the fact that I had PTSD for like 6 years and almost had a mental breakdown. And it was not too long after that we started this. So I was still learning how to talk about it. And the thought of talking about it gave me anxiety. When this film was completed and I got the message about it, I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I had a full-on panic attack because I was going to watch everything I talked about. So I initially hated the idea. I have zero regrets for doing it, because again, I feel like, especially with mental health, it's nice to know that there's other people that go through things. But no, it was a tough process to wrap my brain around initially. And when the film came out, I was like, oh, I cried a lot. Like, I just thought that's all I was going to be doing in the entire film, was crying, because I felt like that's all I did during the whole process. But just because I was still, again, wrapping my brain around it and learning how to process it myself. So it was a very, it was sort of therapeutic, but also it was very difficult to do. But again, I'm glad I did. And then I watched the film, and I'm the least eloquent of the three, for sure, because I still didn't know like how to talk about it. Sometimes I still don't. And people ask some really odd questions when they find out you're a combat veteran. So I just have come up with some pretty vague answers, I guess, if you will. But this process helped me learn how to talk about it. So that was pretty cool.
I'm going to push back and say that you are completely eloquent. And I think your honesty and authentic, like, you were raw, and that was really important. And I think it comes through, in my opinion.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you kind of hit on my next question, which was the therapy that it seems like you were thrown into it emotionally, and especially when it comes to being vulnerable. So it's almost like you were thrown into the therapeutic side of having to share. And I can imagine that's very anxiety ridden. What was that process like? Was it kind of like waking up every day like, okay, I'm doing it again?
After the first day or so, it was kind of, I don't know, the first couple interviews were very difficult. I don't like to be vulnerable. I don't like people to see that I am vulnerable. I'm a very like very firm type of person, a very strong-willed person. So sharing vulnerability was difficult. But I guess once the first interview was kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off. And then after that, I was like, okay, just tell your story and let it flow. And but yeah, no, being vulnerable in front of people that you don't know that well initially, and then knowing that lots of other people will see that it's a lot. So like the second day, I was like, let's try not to think about that. Let's just deal with right now. That's what we're dealing with. So that was a difficult process to wrap my mind around.
And Taylor, you mind if I ask you a question?
Go for it, yeah.
I know we initially had this idea of this, this workshop.
Yeah.
You talked about that relationship between you and the veterans, and knowing and questioning, am I pushing them too much? Should I feel guilty? I want to bring their story out. It's therapy on the other side. Like, can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did you feel working through that process, hearing that story and absorbing that at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was always challenging to know sort of, is it okay to ask somebody to bring up these memories that are obviously traumatic? And, getting to know everybody that's in our film over the years and getting to know their families, I think really reminded us they do have a support system. And we had, feedback during the process. Like that first interview that's Kristina has in the film, it's pretty well, we use a lot of it because that was day one. And like Kristina said, the Band-Aid was ripped off, the floodgates really opened, and it gave us a roadmap of what Kristina was dealing with and sort of showed us like, okay, these are the things that are really hard for her to talk about. We're not going to force her to talk about it every day, but we will have to bring it up again. And so I think it was, Kristina can correct me if I'm misremembering here, but it was a dialogue, and we weren't trying to push her to like have cameras in her house all the time. And we'd be checking in and sort of waiting for those updates. Like, when is a good time to be here? We're not going to try to, turn your life upside down all the time. And same with Robert and Phil. And, I think their families were very generous in this process too, letting us into their, Thanksgiving at the Brady's house, or, family dinners and bedtime with CJ. I think letting us in, seeing sort of the full spectrum, because yes, those memories and stuff were traumatic, and bringing that up was hard, but also Kristina did that interview and picked her kids up at school, like she's a very powerful person who can be that vulnerable and then step back and say like, well, I've got to get through the rest of my day now too. And I think when we saw that she could do that, it felt like, okay, we can find a rhythm here that works. But Kristina, you could talk about that. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, I will say that the only reason that I could get through this film is that the three of you were amazing and very respectful and very, you were always very appreciative. And I appreciated that, because it wasn't like, you never wanted to force us to do anything. And so that was cool, and I think over time we've all become friends and like basically family. We've had slumber parties and the whole 9 yards. So, but yeah, no, it was really great. The way that you all approached that. Like, I thought you did a phenomenal job. And the fact that you all got Phil to open up just shows the power that you guys have, because that's a tough nut to crack.
Yes. But yeah, I'm curious what that's like for you, Robert and Danielle. Asking somebody to open up on camera it's not a small thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. With the assistance of Tamara, who is one of the head directors, really was able to guide the interviews. We were coming at this from a place of extreme wonder when it came to the issue of deported veterans. and obviously it's almost like multi-layered trauma, which is what I call it, because you have two different issues that are coinciding at the same time, which is like immigration and xenophobia and et cetera, et cetera. And then you have, past history and trauma with being a veteran. And so they kind of merged together. And we really wanted to get to know how this came to be. And that was our immediate goal. And so, Hector was really gracious. We went to see Mario Martinez. He really opened up. Daniel flew in to have an interview with us, who's been a voice for the deported veterans' plight and struggles. And so he's very seasoned about talking about the issue. So for the most part, it flowed pretty smoothly because it's an issue that no one knows about. And all the deported veterans that we spoke to are they're enthused to get the word out. So that was kind of my experience and Tamara's experience, speaking on behalf of the crew, Tian, David, Dre, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say that hearing these stories, for me personally, was overwhelming at times, because it just is, you know what I mean? But that's my personal experience. I think I speak on behalf of the crew. But Daniel, he's done multiple interviews and has done this a lot of times. So he he's used to sharing his story. So I'll let him kind of talk about what it's like to have people capture his story and see it develop.
So at the beginning, I was terrible. I first found out about the Deported Veterans Support House in 2014. And at the time, I was a law student in the university in Tijuana. So I showed up, I met Hector, told my story, told him where I served. And from day one, Hector was like, yeah, we gotta get your story out there. We gotta have you do interviews and all that. I was a really good candidate to do all that because I didn't have a criminal record. I didn't have a deportation record. I just kind of self-reported. I didn't see a future in the United States, so I just picked up and left. I was young and I was in school. So he's like, yeah, we gotta get you out there. So I remember the first 2-3 interviews. I mean, I could barely talk. By the time I'm talking to Rob 5 years later, I have that down, to a letter. However, while I've had a lot of practice about talking about the deportation of veterans, about my experience being a deported veteran, my personal trauma, my PTSD, my anxiety, my depression, that's something that I don't talk about. That's something that stays with me. In over the course of the years, again, I thought this was a me problem. Over the course of the years, because of the work of other people like Talia, like Taylor, because of other veterans coming out and speaking about this, veterans like Eli, like Kristina, you start to realize this is not just a me problem, right? You start to realize I'm not the only one going through this. And I think that's why it's so important to tell these veteran stories. That's why the work that you guys do, it's so important, because when you come back from the military, you're changed as a person. As a veteran, it's hard to recognize yourself. You are exposed to some of the most brutal and gruesome things in the world, but you're also exposed to some of the most gruesome and brutal things about yourself. So that's my trauma, right? Knowing what I'm capable of, knowing the level of professional violence is what I call it, that I'm capable of, and realizing that's not who I am, that's not who I want to be, and trying to come back from that. So I went a little bit off a rant there, but yeah, it's difficult. It's absolutely difficult, and knowing that you're not the only one going through that, that you're not the only that you know, it's like you said, these stories of veterans overlap each other. They overlap across services, across generations, across conflicts, and I've come to realize that they overlap across nations. So I actually wrote a book, and that book was my therapy, right? I was lucky enough that it got picked up for production, so I'm looking forward to that. But having that community of other veterans, having those other stories that make you realize that you're not alone and you're not the only one going through this, and that there's a way forward, that's what has really made a difference in my personal life.
I think that's such an important point, and I'm always so curious, like, you know, for the veterans, when you watch in these 3 films at least, like, what do you hope for veteran and non-veteran audiences to take away from the experience of watching? Like, what's the, you know, best case scenario they're leaving with a sense of what, ideally? Like,
I'll say something about that. I just want, for the veteran side of things, I want veterans to know there's other veterans they can talk to, because sometimes that's more comforting, because you feel like they have a better understanding of what you're going through. Because when I started therapy at the VA, it was a civilian doctor, and my first thought was, this bitch has no idea what my life is like. And so I went, I talked. She actually did better than I thought she would. But just, I mean, after watching our film, I reached out to Phil. I hadn't talked to Phil since Iraq, and I'm glad that I did. And we talked a lot more than I thought we would. But knowing you have somebody there for you that genuinely cares and that also can understand is very important. And then the other, for the civilian side of it, I feel like a lot of us come off really rough around the edges, because we kind of are, but they need to realize that we feel probably far more deeply than they'll ever realize, because there's a lot of stuff that we keep buried and they have no idea. And so when we just want to go move out, get the job done, and that comes across very harsh to a lot of civilians, it's not meant to be that way. And we're not trying to be rude or insensitive or anything like that. It's just that that's how we deal with life. The rest of it, the emotional side of it, we're probably going to deal with that on our own, behind closed doors. There's very few people that we want to talk to about that. And I would like for that to be, I guess, more well known, because I have a job right now that I've been at for almost 4 years, and they're just now starting to realize that I'm not an asshole. So, I mean, it took some time, because I come across very harsh and just very matter of fact. And I'm like, it's not meant to be rude or insensitive, but just hopefully they'll see where things come from. And then I wanted to also say about the film on the deported veterans. That is amazing. When I was in the military, and I was in the military with people who were not citizens, I was baffled. Like, what do you mean you don't automatically get a citizenship for this? Because I feel like you should. Like, that is insanity to me. So it's really awesome that you guys are getting the word out about that, because I feel like it is not something that is known. I mean, I didn't even know about it until I'd already been in for several months. Like, I didn't realize that was a thing. So I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many layers to the military. I mean, there's subcultures within subcultures of the military. You know, you speak to a Marine, but then you realize that within the Marines, there's there's the grunts, and then there's the people who are not infantry, and those are very two different cultures in the way they approach things. And then there's the other branches, and there are cultures within the other branches. And,
Certainly the medical corps in the Army, and I'm sure Kristina understands this well too, the medical corps is a subculture of its own within the larger construct of the military too. And we tend to have a really sick, dark sense of humor as a way of coping with a lot of the stuff that we deal with. And so people often get the wrong impression about us and think that we're insensitive or that we're overly sensitive, because we work in medicine. And so I think that's a common misunderstanding. And I think, I'd certainly agree that I think one of the most important messages that we need to try to get across as veterans who are willing to get out there and tell our stories in front of a camera, right? Because it requires a lot of discomfort to do that. And we often have to suffer in order to do that. But in order to get that message out there to other veterans that you are not alone, to me, I think it's worth the bit of pain and suffering that we have to go through to, spill our guts in front of a camera lens in order to hopefully let another veteran out there understand they're not alone and that there's others of us out there who they can speak to and hope that they reach out to us, either as individuals or with the various organizations that are available out there for veterans, depending on what their interests are.
On that note, I do want to say I really genuinely appreciate you guys using platforms to share your own personal story. And it's very brave. Obviously, we spoke about the vulnerability aspect that's connected to it, but to allow people like us to be able to capture it and use it as a way to share. I just want to say I really, really, really honor you guys for doing this, truly.
I wonder if any of our small audience would like to ask a question. I don't know how they do that, but they've been listening for so long. Give them a chance to chime in.
Well, I don't know how many of your audiences there are except me. So, but this has been eye-opening and deeply effective in my emotions because of the pain that everybody's going through in it, and it affects me in that I have members of my family that are veterans, and two of them are lost to me, and one of them is still having issues with having served in the Navy. But I was shocked about deported veterans, and I agree with Chrissy 1,000% that this citizenship should be automatic. There's no doubt about that. And I really appreciate everything that you guys have been talking about and what you're going through and what you've been through. And I haven't seen the movies yet, but I'm going to. But I really like the having this background before seeing them. And I appreciate everything that you guys have said and done. So I really hope that through this, I will have even more of an understanding of veterans and what they've been through. I know that my brother-in-law went through the Tet Offensive and it destroyed him. And he could never talk about it. And the PTSD was severe. And whenever the anniversary of that came up, it would destroy him. So I wish he had had more of an outlet like this. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
I'll just add to that. I think one of the things that was important to us in our filmmaking process, especially as we got to know Kathy Brady, Robert's wife, and Kristina's kids, and Phil's family, like just how much, a military family is affected by this too. Obviously the veteran themselves, but what does that mean when you're raising kids? What does that look like in your relationship? And for Robert and Kathy, at one point, Kathy was like, they've been married for over 25 years. And there were things that were coming up that they had never talked about, from his service. And sort of having that door open for them, I think was a shift, and obviously because of the vulnerability of the filmmaking process. But I hope that, it can help, any of these films can help spur a conversation within families too.
Totally.
I think that's the hope, right? With any kind of, all of our productions at some level, and the spirit of them is common in that sense, it seems to me. So like there's that hope that like, okay, these are the messages that get out there, and the hope is that it's received and it's heard and it's felt, and that there's movement, internally within a person, that there's movement towards something better, and that externally in relationships and interactions that there's movement, discussion, opening up, all those kinds of results is what we hope for, right?
Truly. Yeah, and I for me, it's really been a process of which both of you two did beautifully, which is humanizing the stories, because I believe from civilian to veteran, there's obviously there's a disconnect, like I said earlier, from the experiences. Like we can only imagine, and the reality of it is we don't want to imagine, and so to be able to humanize the stories so people could actually take it in and understand these backstories and experiences, and how it affects not only them, but the people around it, and how that's influencing our entire society from something that's ongoing and ongoing and ongoing, such as war. I think that hopefully we could create some type of social responsibility, like what Daniel said earlier, where he said, I don't want you to just check off a box of thank you for your service, but instead find any way and every way to get active, to contribute in some way. So I hope that is what, from all of our films, a viewer will take from that, is to be able to create a sense of sympathy, because I don't think empathy is appropriate, because we'll never understand totally. But enough sympathy to actually take a step forward and do something, even if it's a next door neighbor or down the street or around the corner.
I think as veterans, we have a duty to tell those stories. We get so sick of hearing this approach to our experiences that, I could never imagine what it was like. And I think you're exactly right. It's not that they can't, it's that they don't want to. And I think we have an obligation to give them a sense of understanding about what it is that we are doing on their behalf, whether they voted for it or not, whether we had a choice in what we did or not. We're doing it on their behalf. And I think civilians need to understand that they bear a certain amount of responsibility for everything that veterans are going through. And they're not going to understand that social and emotional, spiritual burden that they also have to carry to help us, right? We need to unload some of that. We can't carry that burden all on our own. We need our communities, we need our families, we need our society to help us carry that burden, like it or not. And so I think it's essential that filmmakers like all of these who have worked so hard to come into our world and help bring us back home to their world, right? We need these collaborations, and we need to get out there and tell our stories, because otherwise it's this cycle of violence continues.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
It reminds me of the origin of when I was first embarking on this. I kept saying to myself, and then finally to you guys, I was like, I don't feel like do I have the right to do this? Do I have the right to tell the story? Do I have the right to do any of this? And the what I was getting back was constantly like, yes, on the flip, you should definitely take an interest in this. It's your duty as well, as a civilian, as a citizen, as a member of, this society we're all sharing. Yes, and being struck with it that way made me feel that much more like of the urgency to do it and the necessity to do it. As a civilian in collaboration, that was so much the structure underneath it all.
Yes. The United States has developed this culture of comfort, of living in this bubble where I feel safe, where I feel good. And it's important for us as creators, producers, directors, actors, writers, to break that bubble. To break that bubble. Because when someone is comfortable, there is no growth. And there are things in this country that do need to get changed, that we do need to work with. There's a lot of room for improvement, and that improvement won't take, it won't happen until we break that bubble, and people don't get to say, oh, I didn't know better. Yes, you did. Like I'm going to show you this problem that we have. I'm going to show you a couple of solutions. It's up to you whether you want to be part of the solution or not, but you don't get to say I didn't know about it.
Absolutely.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I have a comment and then a question. My comment is for Kristina. I wanted to let you know that, yeah, absolutely, you do come off as like a tough lady, but your heart shows too. Your heart comes through, and the energy you give off isn't that you're somebody that I'd be wary of. You're somebody that I would want, I'd want you to have my back,
I appreciate.
So, and then Robert, the question I have for you is, because I think your film is going to be the one that gets every person who sees it pissed off. And I think that's important that people hear about the situation, and they do get frustrated and angry about it because it's just not right. What next? Like, if people get riled up and things need to change, what's the next step?
Well, currently right now, I know that ACLU has been working with the Biden administration. There's been multiple different organizations working with the Biden administration to change this current issue. It's something that Biden has said he was going to handle, and there's been slow progress. I very much will put a lot of emphasis on slow progress for something that's so dynamic. There currently are an unknown amount of deported veterans globally. And so when we say deported in America, usually, honestly, in America, a lot of people just escape to Latin community, but it's not just the Latin community that's affected. It's everywhere. China, Haiti, it's Jamaica, it's literally all over the world. And so we've had some good things that have happened. Mario Martinez's deportation case got canceled. Mauricio is coming home, so there's been slow progress. You can tap in with the most important thing actually is to find out who your local legislators are and senators, and really bug them and let them know how horrible of an issue this is. Because if it's going to be any change, it has to be from an uprising from civilians and from people themselves. And we don't have to make it too complicated. You can find out exactly who the person right down the street who's running things, and allow this to kind of have a ripple effect. We're going to be sending out more and more information. You can sign up on bringthemhomefilm.com on our film, and we're going to be sending out different information as we have good news and things progress. So yeah, that's my answer. But I will say, even more so for me as just a civilian filmmaker, artist, creative, I think Daniel will have way more information on what he believes should be the next step, being a deported veteran himself.
Is that my cue?
That's
Okay.
your key.
Okay. There are about a dozen different organizations out there that are working to fixing this problem. Me, Rob, and Hector actually spoke with then candidate Bernie Sanders. I know Hector has also spoken with Kamala Harris. And one of the promises of the Biden administration was to end the deportation of deported veterans. Now, a couple of months ago, there was a letter that came out from Homeland Security saying that they would no longer deport veterans. Now, the problem with anything that's happening in Washington is that it gets political. You know, the Democrats want to have a win, the Republicans don't want to give them the win, and then when it's the other way around, the Republicans don't want to win, and the Democrats don't want to do that. And that's one of the problems that we're facing. That and the other half dozen issues of that we're dealing with in the country. Robbie's absolutely right. Reach out to your local representatives, reach out to your politicians, because the easy way to do it is with an executive order from the president. That hasn't happened yet. The long way to do it is for the immigration law to change. You even say immigration, change to an immigration law, and people already like shut their ears and they're like, well, you know, you got DACA, you got this, you got that. However, I believe that ending the deportation of veterans is something that it's a no-brainer, but it's a unifying cause, because it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, everyone is pro-veteran. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you're in, everyone can unify into agreeing that veterans should be repatriated, they should not be deported, right? They should be given citizenship as soon as they serve, as soon as they graduate boot camp, I believe. And that could open the door to something greater. That could open the door to immigration reform, to DACA. That could open the door to really sit people down and rethink the way they look at immigration in the United States.
So much to process.
I'm really glad we got to have this conversation. I feel like we talked about earlier, it's not often that you have this many sort of films in a festival, and being able to kind of share our experiences making it and your experiences being in it. It's been really cool.
Totally. And all three films have a totally different artistic experience and a different access point into the conversation. And hopefully, if someone saw all three films, they would see how dynamic this conversation is, you know, and how much it varies across the board. Yeah,
it's sort of a good reminder that there's so many shades of the experience. You know, it's not a singular thing. It's not like check off the box, the veteran movie, and everybody now understands it. You know, it's a whole, there's nuance within that space. I'm glad that we're all here.
Totally.
Thanks.
So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have heard all of your stories, and I'm fired up in so many different directions. So thank you so much.
To our loyal but, you know, committed audience here.
I really appreciate you guys, and I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of this and to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.